So thank you for joining us today, and for you people online, appreciate it. Today I just wanted to talk about this horse called early voting and the treatment success we've had with him, and give a little bit of background as to sort of what the science is behind it and how this sort of all came about. So I'm speaking to you today from the Aztec unit at the University of Kentucky, which is the advanced science and technology for commercialization at the university, and we'd like to graciously acknowledge them and all their help in the Commonwealth of Kentucky with housing us up here and the research that we've been able to do with the University of Kentucky. I suppose the story goes back a long way. This chubby little guy here was me as sort of a 1-year-old, and that's my father, Granddad Dick, and that's Granddad Leo. What was interesting about that time of life is that I had no idea that 3 miles up the road, this guy here, Professor Liggins, on the right with the glasses, was changing the way the world saw childbirth. And at first glance, it may not mean that much, but until 1967, everyone believed that the mother initiated final maturation of the fetus and childbirth. And in 67, Liggins described that actually that was wrong, and that the baby actually initiated this. And that fundamental change in the ability to then use cortisol to help at-risk pregnancies changed the way of humanity, really, and is believed to have led to 10 million lives being saved every year. So years ago, after I finished grad school, I met up with Professor Liggins down in New Zealand, and he was gracious enough to start doing research with me and socializing with me. And we formed Mont Liggins Research Trust, which goes today, although Professor Liggins unfortunately is no longer with us. This is just a summary from the University of Auckland of some of our research that we did together that was published some years ago. And for us, getting a little bit of media out there and explaining on a fundamental level that we're actually not just doing boffin science and ivory towers, but we're actually got something practical, like Professor Liggins started with in '67, is very important. And hopefully this talk will illuminate a few of those practicalities. So this is, I suppose, the long road. This started 35 years ago in my life, and this is our research accomplishments that we've achieved as a research group. This starts from my graduate work at the University of California, Davis, right through to today. And rather than going through all of this, I'd just like to highlight a couple of points that are pertinent to this research in particular. So some time ago, we were the first group to actually look at mitochondrial functional probes in the horse. So essentially we could look at some fundamental cell function. Now this technology has advanced tremendously now, as you'll see later on. But this was a very, very good starting point for us, and then describing the growth hormone axis and its effect on male fertility, and then the growth hormone axis in the horse, and then how we could manipulate that, was fundamental to the research that's led to early voting success today. So we do multi-species work. We don't just do the human and the horse. We also were able to save the rarest animal on earth, the kakapo in New Zealand, Professor Liggins and myself. And we donated our time, the trust did, and all of our science. We did this with a lovely guy called Daryl Easton in New Zealand from the department. And while we were going through this time, we were realizing that the growth hormone axis sort of had expanded and was beyond our scientific depth. And by that, what I mean is the growth hormone axis was believed to be centrally controlled by the brain. And we sort of didn't think this was right. So we started looking individually at cells. And so we identified a thing called the chaperone protein axis, which is basically an axis that runs your cell. It's, if you imagine your nucleus, your genetic material is like your hard drive. The chaperone protein axis is actually your operating system for your cell. So we then were able to look at this intracellular axis and show that in the whole body it's related to the growth hormone axis. It's actually related to all other axes, but we use this as a model. So then we've been able to go on looking at then the functioning of the cell from a metabolic standpoint, looking at mitochondria, and then being able to show that why disease and old age matters. is that you sort of get protein sludging inside your cell. Now, if you have no disease when you're a young person or a young animal, then you won't have this protein sludging. However, as we age, we all get a bit of protein sludging. What that just truly means is that our cells stop acting and our operating system slows down and slows down. So this is just an example of some media that we have had over the years and some scientific papers that we've had. Some fundamental changes in the way in which we understand the health and welfare of the horse. This in particular was the first horse whose racing career was saved with new technology that we have a patent on that enables us to actually grow a brand new tendon in the laboratory and put it inside the horse's leg, and then they were able to go back to racing. So this is a little academic, but I just needed to point this out a little bit, please. This is aging of a horse, and this is the growth hormone axis, and we can just clearly see that the growth hormone axis goes down with age, and that's right up to greater than 20 years. What's sort of interesting, this is a very large population we did both here in central Kentucky and in New Zealand. But when you look at the systemic axis and you compare it to the intracellular axis, which is the chaperone protein axis, this measures the dysfunction of the chaperone protein axis, so the amount of protein sludging. So you can clearly see that as our population gets older, and the growth hormone axis is going down, which means that systemically things are not going well, that we can relate that back to the actual individual cell and show that we have dysfunction in the cell. So this led us to the understanding of what really happens in aging of the cell and disease state. So this is something that we put into the patent office some 15 years ago, which is now being widely accepted. So essentially what you have is you have these guys making the energy get old, and in disease states they get unstable. So you've got these two different things going on, and the mitochondria then spew out reactive oxygen species inside the cell. Now again, this happens in cell aging, but also happens in cell ill health. And what we've been able to do is develop a treatment technique to stabilize the cell and actually get rid of some of the protein sludging. This is just a graphic representation, again, of the cell with the mitochondria, and this happens both in a disease state, so in this particular case, in anaejaculatory syndrome, and then also in aging. So this is the mitochondria, they're getting out of control, they produce reactive oxygen species, they go out into the cell itself, into the cytoplasm, and then what that does is it causes aggregation of proteins. These proteins are useless. They don't get fed out to the body, and they're sort of placeholders. And the pure snow globe that you did have when you were a kid, like that little fat little kid that you saw on the screen, he's now 56, and so I've got a lot of sludging going on. My snow globe's got a lot of snow in it. What we have found out is that we can get chaperone proteins that we extract from the pregnancy of sheep, and we can actually apply them, and they go inside the cell and actually get rid of some of that protein. Now, unfortunately, this is a repeatable thing in aging because the mitochondria is still old. The great news is if you're a young person or a young horse, then your mitochondria are stable. So once you get rid of this protein aggregate, then you literally can be cured of what's ailing you. And in this particular case of early voting, it was anaejaculatory syndrome. So this is literally just a human product, and this funds our research around the world. These are chaperone proteins that, as I said, have been extracted. And this is just an application oil that we use, which is emu oil, sourced from just north of Nashville, Tennessee. So if you don't know the story about this horse, early voting is just a tremendously bred horse, and it turns out to be a tremendously nice horse. Most champions, in my experience, are just lovely, lovely horses, very intelligent. And he went and bet all odds and bet Epicenter in the Preakness 2 years ago. And after his retirement as a sound horse, he then went to stand at one of the prestigious studs of the world at Coolmore at Ashford Stud out in Versailles in Kentucky. We got involved because of this next slide. This slide here shows that he was actually removed from stud duties at Coolmore, and the reason was that he had a clinical problem called anejaculatory syndrome. So he just basically couldn't ejaculate anymore, and this had been diagnosed by world experts to be unrecoverable. So because we had a treatment that we've used in many species before, we went and used chaperone proteins as a treatment for this horse's anejaculatory syndrome. And because he actually started as a fertile horse, and when he was ejaculating, he had a very high fertility rate. As long as we knew that we could get him ejaculating again, we knew he'd be fertile again. So the application is really quite a simple application. It's transcutaneous. So we add the protein transfer oil to the chaperone proteins, and then we just literally apply it to the inside, the axilla of the horse, which is very vascular and gets taken up in the bloodstream. You can just see me rubbing it on there. It's just that simple. And then scientifically, this is what happened to him. There is a stable hormone that's produced in the body. It's a conjugated estrogen. So believe it or not, the testes is a very big source of estrogen, and especially in the stallion. And the reason for that is estrogen's involved in testicular function, and most specifically making sperm. So this just shows our treatment. His conjugated estrogens went up by 77% as he went into the start of the breeding season after treatment. So not only did he get over his syndrome, but also we showed that this somehow physiologically had effectivity from the testes itself. So subsequent to that, we've been lucky enough to have some nice positive media about this horse. But you know, ejaculation, that's one part of the story. We still need to connect all the dots and make sure that he still is the fertile horse that we know he was. And so what we'd like to announce today is that this horse has been successful, and that he has achieved pregnancy, and not only achieved early pregnancy, but pregnancy that's gone on in the mid-20 days. And this is very hard to see, but this here, believe it or not, is actually a developing 25-day-old embryo. And it's hard to see with ultrasounds, but the ultrasound is coming down through here into the uterus. And then this here is the little embryo. And what's amazing at this stage is that there is actually a heartbeat. So this little tadpole is starting to look like a little horse right at this age already. And if you look very closely, and it's hard to tell, but right here where my finger is, this is just on a loop, and you can loop it yourself, you'll actually see a flickering there. Now, this is a sort of an interesting teaching thing. Some students that I've taught can't see that flickering. I don't know why that is, but once they see it, they'll see it forever. So if you can't see it, it's going to sound weird, but if you sing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star into your brain, somehow it connects the dots, and you'll be able to see that flickering. It's just a good trick. So we have a fertile horse that's ejaculating and producing good sperm, and now able to show that we have a good, healthy, viable conceptus. So like all science, we rely quite heavily on our collaborators, and I'd like to acknowledge them. I suppose our saying in our family is that I'm just a boy, which is true, and I certainly are on the tails of a lot of good people who have all helped us, including local clinicians here in town, most specifically Dr. Umfenauer. And I would encourage you, if it's okay, to go to the Montliggins Trust and check out our website and read more about just our general research in multi-species. And I would also just like to acknowledge the vast team of people that have specifically worked on this project and helped us get to this point where we have a commercially viable, ejaculating, fertile, and let's be honest, the most important of it all, a very happy horse, because the horse's health and welfare is paramount to everything. And this guy is a lovely, lovely guy, a gentleman, and he's really liking life. He knows that he now, whatever he was feeling before, he's not feeling anymore, and he's happy in his job, as we say. So I'd like to thank Rich and Zara and Jason and Greg and Maddie and Foyne and Justin, and obviously post-humorously Professor Liggins. So thanks very much for your attention, everyone, and I hope that made some sense.